This is a film about the right of a people to freedom and the power of the human spirit to resist against overwhelming odds. It's the story of Burma, once known as the Golden Land. On the surface, everything appears serene. It's a country of extraordinary beauty and gracious people. But Burma is also a secret country, isolated for the past 34 years since a brutal dictatorship seized power. The assault on its people all but forgotten. To tell their story, we had to go undercover. What we found was a land of fear.
People who were carrying the posters and flags, they were shot and then they all died immediately on the spot.
9 students were badly tortured and they were sent to prison for 7 years just for singing a freedom song.
Those who have already been in prison, they know what it is like to be in a Burmese prison, and they know that any day they're liable to be put back there, and yet they do not give up.
The generals who crushed democracy in Burma have ruled with a regime so harsh, bloody and uncompromising that the parallels with Indonesia and East Timor are striking. More than 1 million people have been forced from their homes, and according to the United Nations, untold thousands have been massacred, tortured and subjected to a modern form of slavery. Burma, says Amnesty International, is a prison without bars. In 1988, the year before the democracy movement in China was crushed so publicly in Tiananmen Square, as many as 10,000 people were killed here by their government in a matter of days. The outside world knew little about this. The difference was the absence of television cameras. This film is being made in secret as the regime attempts to cover its crimes with the help of foreign investors and by declaring 1996 the year of the tourist. The history of modern Burma reaches back through the Second World War and 100 years of British imperial rule. With a population of 45 million, it has a natural wealth perhaps unequalled in Asia, oil and gas and vast teak forests. Renamed Myanmar by its military rulers, Burma has been turned into one of the world's poorest countries. And as we discovered, and will reveal later in this film, it's also a country where slave labour and child labour are common. To the British who colonised Burma in the early 19th century, the Golden Land was always a sideshow to its rule over India. However, under a guise of benevolence familiar to Indian nationalists, the same myths applied. The British were bringing civilization, not empire building. Rudyard Kipling wrote a famous popular song that romanticized Mandalay, a town he never saw, and which was then being stripped bare of its teak forests, leaving vast dust bowls. Fortunes were earned by the British exporters of Burma's rice and precious stones. In the 1930s, companies were making profits of £12 million, a huge amount in today's terms. The oil fields became a byword for expatriate wealth, and these interests were protected by an imperial army.
Present military mentality is conditioned by the colonial period. It's like a colonial army. occupying the country. They behave like a corporate body, serving its own interests. So they don't recognize the people's representative or the will of the people because they themselves, they regard it as separated from and superior to the populace. That tradition derived from the colonial period.
The movement for independence from Britain began in the 1930s among the students and monks. The national hero was a young army officer, Aung San, the father of Nobel Peace Prize winner Suu Kyi. During the Second World War, Aung San and his comrades exploited the Japanese occupation to win independence. But in 1948, as independence was about to be granted, Aung San was assassinated. His name is revered in Burma today. What was unique about the movement he began and which led to democratic governments in the post-war years was its quality of Buddhism, socialism and democracy. The ideas of Marx, Nehru and Voltaire were adapted. Marx was virtually transformed into a disciple of Buddha. This flowering of democratic socialism coincided with a period of turmoil as Burma's ethnic peoples demanded autonomy. But in 1962, the army stepped in and seized power. Its leader was a Stalin-like figure called Ne Win.
He ruled the country like Stalin ruled Russia through KGB. So he set up his intelligence apparatus, which he used as his eyes and ears. So he sees the country through this apparatus. So this apparatus become a government within the government.
I think he's a control maniac. He's one of the most extraordinary, contradictory characters that one could ever come across. One who changed a good deal. I think in his earlier years he was a playboy. In the 60s he suddenly changed as a result of perhaps of his advisors. He changed his whole policy and became a very rigorous, authoritarian, puritanical, for other people anyway, kind of guy, and decided that Burma should be taken away from all kinds of foreign influence.
That hypocrisy in Ne Win is fascinating, isn't it? Because he was the gambler, the man who liked racing and turned up at Ascot now and then he banned it all for the Burmese.
Yes, I think he may have got cheated by a bookie at Ascot.
Ne Win imposed a silence on Burma. He abolished its lively free press and a strict censorship control newspapers, radio, books and films, isolating one of the most literate societies in Asia. The new rules stated, any incorrect ideas and opinions which do not accord with the times are banned. These torn and tattered books in a Rangoon market are the remains of free expression in Burma. Even our filming of them attracted the attention of military intelligence. Of course, rumour has been impossible to ban, especially when the subject is the dictator himself.
When his soothsayer warned him there might be a bloodbath, he would stand in front of a mirror and he would trample on dead meat or something to simulate the blood, and then he would shoot himself in the mirror. And having done that, this would avert the possibility of assassination.
Of all the world's megalomaniacs, perhaps only Ne Win is ruled by astrology and superstition. The best example of this was the day he bankrupted the population. Without warning, he cancelled most of Burma's currency, replacing it with banknotes that added up to or included the figure 9. According to his chief astrologer, 9 was his lucky number. The Burmese weren't quite so lucky. As most people here keep their savings in cash, most of them were ruined.
Burma was now completely impoverished. People went hungry while their fertile land was given the ignominious status of least developed country. Desperate for foreign exchange, the regime forced bankrupt farmers into the fields at gunpoint, while Ne Win bought properties in London and Tokyo and made a fortune in precious stones. The touch paper had been lit. The frustration that had been building for 25 years now exploded as the students took to the streets.
It's just after dawn beside Inya Lake in the center of Rangoon. We're filming this with great care because even at this hour, it's almost certain we're being watched, which is a normal state of affairs for many Burmese. This causeway is known as the White Bridge. On March the 16th, 1988, hundreds of school children and students marched along it, singing the national anthem. Then as they looked behind them, they saw the steel helmets of the army and they knew they were trapped. According to eyewitnesses, the soldiers beat many of them to death, singling out the girls. Those who escaped were pursued here into the lake, where they were caught and drowned one by one. Of the survivors, 42 were locked in a waiting van and left in the noonday heat, where all of them suffocated to death. In the meantime, fire engines were brought here to wash away the blood.
The government was arresting the students, hundreds of students, including the female students. So on the way to prison, we were shouting that we were students, we are not criminals. They began to torture and beat the students. Some of them they took about around 1 or 2 a.m. They came and take one by one. And they never come back.
Now we are the Kanago Vine Sayama, Yainatari, Vario, Alumni, the two solution, Eludi, Yainat, Soto Varo, Alumu, Kanago, Tremai, Tika, Senivari, I do the Piedana.
Despite this oppression, the people had set up what they called a parliament of the streets. A free press returned, with some 40 newspapers and magazines, with titles like Scoop, New Victory, and Liberation Daily. Some were printed, others photocopied and handwritten, and most were distributed free. Making a rare appearance on television, Ne Win threatened his people.
It's now 8 minutes past 8 in the morning. The people of Burma chose this time, on the 8th day of the 8th month in 1988, to begin one of the most remarkable popular uprisings in modern times. The dock workers were the first to go on strike. Then in the days and weeks that followed, it seemed that almost everyone in Burma was showing a defiance and courage, at least equal to those who stormed the Berlin Wall.
The students began it. Then each group came out with a banner saying, "We're from the doctors, we're from the lawyers." And they walked through the street shouting various slogans, of which the most common was, "This is our business." The government, "This is our business." Running the country, "This is our business," which in Burmese is do ye, do ye, do ye, do ye.
As tension rose between the people and the regime, Ne Win faced a new opponent, whose presence in Burma he had not reckoned on. Aung San Suu Kyi, daughter of the national hero Aung San, returned from her home in England. The leaders of the democracy movement persuaded her to join the struggle, and at her first appearance in Rangoon, more than 500,000 people heard her call for the restoration of democracy. The people now had a leader. Suu Kyi had never been a politician, but now, as a founder of the National League for Democracy, she called for elections. She spoke at rallies throughout the country. In one incident, she came close to assassination when troops refused to let her pass and threatened to shoot her.
Whatever problems arise are generally created because a truckload of armed soldiers come along and start waving their guns around. If the secretary of the local store can order his men to shoot down people without any real cause, it means that there's something very wrong with the system.
Despite the massacres in Rangoon, still the generals feared Suu Kyi. In July 1989, she was placed under house arrest in her father's home. 3,000 of her party workers were also arrested. With the opposition weakened, so they thought, the generals called elections for the following year. But they had failed to understand the depth of the country's frustration. Even sections of the army and police who had not been involved in the killings supported Suu Kyi. The National League for Democracy won an overwhelming victory, gaining 82% of the parliamentary seats. The generals were stunned and refused to hand over power. But the people's desire for freedom could not be smothered. The atrocities of 1988 remained a rallying cry.
Troops have been shooting people all day, but twice today, troops came to the hospital demanding that they be given the bodies of the dead and also the wounded. When the nurses and the doctors refused, saying that the patients needed more treatment, the troops opened fire, killing at least 4 doctors and 8 nurses.
This is amateur videotape of Rangoon Hospital. Having banned foreign television, the regime ordered anyone with a camera to be shot on sight. In defiance of this, there was some courageous reporting. On one tape, the voices of 2 Burmese cameramen are heard as soldiers prepare to fire at them. "What shall we do?" asks one of them, to which his friend replies, "Keep on filming until they shoot us."
There was sort of like a civil war inside the city. And I could hear all the gunfire just sitting in my home. The military troops all over Rangoon, they've been shooting all the demonstrators. At one point, they didn't have enough medicine to treat these injured people. So doctors, nurses, and medical students decided to appeal to the military soldiers not to shoot anymore. And they had a banner, a Red Cross banner, writing, "Please stop shooting." And these soldiers even shot inside the Rangoon General Hospital. And there were many people killed at the time.
The generals so feared the power of the demonstrators that they moved to dispose of them, dead or alive, in Rangoon Cemetery. The atrocities even extended to the crematorium, where a line of trucks took the dead and the wounded.
In fact, my house is quite close to the crematorium. And during that time, I had a lot of news that they had brought a lot of dead bodies, and some of the bodies, some of the people were even not dead yet, and they were cremated. But at the same time, I could see the flame coming out from the cemetery all the time. And all the crematorium, in fact, was surrounded by the military troops.
So they were burning dead people and people who were not dead?
They didn't even identify the body. Not to mention to inform the parents. In fact, they just brought everybody that they saw on the street.
Suu Kyi remained a prisoner for 6 years. Alone in this house on University Avenue, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Her whispered name became a byword, and people would pass her house just to be reassured by the sound of her playing her piano. Last year, she was finally released, though today she is still denied freedom of movement. As this film goes to air, her husband, Michael Arris, and their 2 sons in England have again been refused permission to visit her. Early one Saturday morning, David Munro and I went to see her, our cameras concealed from the military intelligence guards who continue to watch her every move.
What were the most difficult times to you personally during your house arrest?
There were times when I was worried for my colleagues, and there were times when I worried for our people out there when they seemed to be undergoing a lot of repression. And I worried about my sons very much because the young one was only 12. And he had to be put into boarding school. So, of course, naturally, I worried about these things. Yes. But then I would always remind myself that the families of my colleagues were far worse off because those of my colleagues who were put in prison in Burma, their families were also insecure.
Were you able to stay in touch with Michael during that time?
Not throughout that time. There were times when we were out of touch.
For how long was there?
I think the longest period was for about 2 years and 4 months or 5 months, something like that.
No letters or anything during that time? No letters from the children got through?
No.
I would try to imagine being you and surrounded by a hostile force, cut off from your family, your colleagues and comrades and friends. Weren't there times when you were actually terrified?
No, because I didn't feel hostile towards them. This is what people don't seem to understand. They say, well, you must have been terrified, but why? I didn't feel hostile towards the guards or the soldiers surrounding me. And I think fear comes out of hostility.
You and your people are at present up against quite uncompromising and brute power. How can you reclaim the democracy that you won at the ballot box with that power confronting you?
I don't think we're the first people who have had to face an uncompromising and brutal power.
But the question is the most difficult one,
in the quest for freedom and basic human rights. I think we depend chiefly on our own people, on the will of our own people for democracy.
But it still comes down to, on one side, there is a power that has all the guns.
But increasingly, I think it is getting more difficult in this world to resolve problems through military means. It is no longer acceptable. I do not think the ASEAN countries themselves would accept a military solution to the problem in Burma. And the fact that the authorities themselves are so keen on attacking us in their papers seem to indicate that they also are not depending on guns alone.
This is the death railway of World War II, carved through the Burmese jungle by the Japanese at the cost of 16,000 Allied lives. One life, it is said, for every sleeper. For the men who built this railway and survived, believing their horror would never happen again, there is a terrible irony here.
During last year's 50th anniversary celebrations of victory over the Japanese, I remember the Burmese being mentioned just once in the television coverage. An ex-serviceman was asked by a reporter, "What about the Burmese?" And he replied that they had vanished when the Japanese invaded. In fact, more than 100,000 Burmese and other Asian prisoners also died building the death railway. If the British Army in Burma was a forgotten army, then the people over whose land it fought were invisible victims. And that remains true today as history repeats itself.
This is the regime's great secret. An extension of the death railway linking the towns of Ye and Tavoy. Once again, it's being built with slave labour in an area where foreigners are banned. Under the noses of the guards, we filmed it for the first time. It has been estimated that more than 200,000 people have been forced to build this railway, of whom up to 300 have been killed or have died from disease and exhaustion. The democracy movement have tried to video evidence of this, sometimes with tragic results.
Ata ande jala yin three way. Amoli let to joy average. Kalele Amiaji will Abuma Luji Bata name Malaysia, those me paid all we will Lujita Matana Boo. Yes.
A report by the American State Department says the Burmese regime routinely uses forced labour and that this railway will transport soldiers and supplies into the area where a $1 billion gas pipeline is being built for the regime by the French oil company Total, which is part owned by the French government, and the American company Undercover. The children here are being forced to work in temperatures of 35 degrees centigrade. They carry heavy loads of clay on their heads. This girl fell back exhausted, holding a disjointed shoulder. This boy is 10 years old. He has this job because he is small enough to fit in the hole directly beneath the grinder. But as we discovered, it's highly dangerous work. The children are forced to make bricks for the army, who then sell them back to the railway construction company. This load of clay, as heavy as wet cement, almost buried the boy. We stopped filming and quickly pulled him free. The other children would not have had the strength to save him. How many, we wondered, die like this? More than half the national budget of Burma goes on the army, guns, and the means of repression, much of it paid for with foreign exchange. To the generals in Rangoon, tourism provides this money, along with a dubious respectability, as foreigners are carefully guided to the country's magnificent, silent monuments.
Is that as high as it goes?
6 weeks.
I know this isn't fair, Patsy, but I have longer legs than you do.
Too small. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, it's fabulous. It is.
Denise, tu descends?
Toute technique.
Try and fix it. Are you watching me? This is the way to go down.
You want to get your hand out of the way, Dominique?
How did you come down?
And just use the banister as support.
Just follow me. If you fall, I'll stop you.
And then you roll your skirt up.
These tourists are unaware that the local people they meet risk imprisonment if they speak too freely to them. Our soldiers, says the Minister of Tourism, are here to protect you.
The British built this guest house around the time that Rudyard Kipling was writing The Road to Mandalay. I wonder if he'd recognise the Burma of his dreams today. According to the regime in the year of the tourist, and I quote, "Roads will be wider, lights will be brighter, grass will be greener, and tours will be cleaner." Pick up a travel brochure these days from any of the famous names, British Airways, Kuoni, Orient Express, and you would be pardoned for thinking, But the same Ministry of Propaganda supplied the copy. For example, to find an unspoilt country today may seem impossible, but Burma is such a place. Indeed, Rangoon means end of strife. It's easy to see why. Its easygoing ways are a tonic to the Western traveller. It's a tonic that doesn't come cheap in one of the world's poorest countries. A cruise up the Irrawaddy to Mandalay will cost you more than £2,000 for just 11 days. However, there is a Kipling piano bar, and it says here, ensuite cabins that are not just simply luxurious, but include the latest satellite TV, video, and your own personal safe. And in the evenings, gentlemen will feel relaxed in a jacket and tie, and ladies in a dress. What sound advice! And that's not all. There's a free lecture on Burma's history and culture.
But you don't get this in the lecture. These are prisoners restoring the moat of the Imperial Palace in Mandalay in preparation for the Year of the Tourist. The regime says they are criminals in a country where writing a poem or singing a song calling for democracy can get you 10 years hard labour. And here is the moat, finished. All it needs is tourists. Brian Whittaker, an Australian lawyer, witnessed slave labour when he and his wife Jacqueline flew into a new tourist airport in the north of Burma.
We heard the clinking of chains and we went outside and noticed about 30 people crushing rock by hand, and one of them raised his prison uniform at the legs to display manacles which were running across his ankles. He then quietly lifted his shirt, which showed a chain around his waist, and from my memory he also had a manacle around his neck. And one of the officials informed us that the prisoners were political prisoners.
He told you they were political prisoners?
Yes, he very explicitly said that they were political prisoners.
The Burmese government have said, when questioned about this by human rights organisations, that this is a traditional voluntary form of labour.
That's rubbish. It was clearly not voluntary. You don't volunteer to crush rock dressed in threadbare uniform in the freezing cold with chains all over your body and standing under guard. I'm familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I believe that what I observed was a clear breach of the provisions and the articles relating to forcible work and slavery.
Forced labour goes on all over the country, but a lot of these projects are aimed at the tourist trade, tourist industry. They are meant for tourists, building roads, building bridges. So we do not think that it's a good idea to promote Visit Myanmar 1996, which is not to say that tourists should stay away forever from Burma. After all, Burma will always be here. And one day when it's a democratic Burma, I think it will be a place that tourists will enjoy visiting, and they need not have any qualms about visiting it.
These prisoners are preparing a tourist attraction in Mandalay. The actual road to Mandalay has recently been converted to an expressway. For the local people forced to work on it, it's known as the Road of No Return. According to Amnesty, 2 workers who tried to escape were executed by soldiers on the spot. One was hacked to death.
Mr. Sherwood, last year your company signed a deal for $35 million with the Burmese regime. What does that involve?
Well, it's basically an investment in ships and shore facilities for the development of river tourism in Burma.
Did you consider all the implications of Burma's rather appalling record as far as human rights are concerned before you went in with this project?
Well, I did, and I've tried to investigate these allegations about human rights infringements. It's very hard to pin them down. People make these accusations or allegations I immediately try to see if there's any proof to them. I can't find it, but of course I accept that I cannot visit all of Burma, and my visits are limited to the principal cities, so perhaps that's out of sight, out of mind attitude. So I can't speak any further than my personal knowledge.
Did you make really any attempt before you invested in Burma to see this other side?
Well, what I did do was that I contacted the senior CIA representative for Burma and had extensive discussions about the truth of all of these allegations. And he confirmed to me that, that they were all untrue, or that to the degree that they occurred, they were related to the drugs war. So
they're not allegations. I mean, I mean, you would think that the United Nations, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the United States government, the United States State Department says, for instance, forced labor is routine in Burma. I don't think these all come into the realm of allegations. There's a great deal of substance there, surely.
Well, perhaps you can say so, but I don't have any personal evidence of it.
Did you see the elected leader of the country, Aung San Suu Kyi, when you were there?
No, I didn't, no. I think it would be inappropriate or untactful for us to open a dialogue with the opposition leader.
But she's the elected leader. Some would say that the people, the generals that you saw, are the opposition.
Well, I believe that the generals are in power.
The generals' power is backed by foreign money. One estimate is that since it crushed democracy in 1990, the Burmese regime has drawn 65% of its financial support from oil companies. The main backers are the French company Total and its American partner Unocal. The oil pipeline they are building in the south of Burma will allow the generals to sell the country's natural gas to Thailand. The deal will give them an estimated $400 million a year over 30 years.
And the British are back. Last December, a London Chamber of Commerce seminar was told about the real visionaries in the Burmese government. And in the House of Commons, the Foreign Office Minister Jeremy Hanley made this remarkable statement: "Through commercial contacts with democratic nations such as Britain, the Burmese people will gain experience of democratic principles. Of course, just as the peoples of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Indonesia, and all the other modern tyrannies have gained experience of the democratic virtues of British business. If the opposite wasn't true, this would be funny."
We repeatedly asked ministers at the Foreign Office and the Department of Trade in London to be interviewed for this film, but they refused. So did the Burmese embassy. We can reveal that one British company that did trade with the Rangoon regime was the arms company B-Mark. B-Mark was a subsidiary of Astra, whose chairman was Gerald James.
It became apparent as we investigated B-Mark's affairs after we took it over that they were running a secret order book and also conducting other covert operations on behalf of the intelligence community.
What evidence do you have that B-Mark did ship arms to Burma?
Well, here you have a list with several countries on, including Burma.
And what is this document?
Well, that document emerged when, under great pressure, the receiver was forced by Sir Richard Scott, who threatened him with a court order, to disclose information to me.
So this, in fact, is a byproduct of the Scott investigation?
That's correct.
Yeah. I see the sales to Burma were in 1990. That was 2 years after the military regime cracked down there, and so arms arriving at that time would have been quite significant.
Yes, I should imagine it would have been very significant.
But the British government have made clear since 1988 that they would not grant licenses for the export of arms to Burma.
Yes, I mean, the British government denied a lot of things, but in the end it's turned out to be a pack of lies.
Like Britain and America, Australia has pursued a double-faced policy. While the government condemned human rights abuses, the former Prime Minister Bob Hawke led a trade mission to Rangoon.
We had been uniformly impressed by the competence, knowledge and commitment of these ministers and their associates to the economic development of Myanmar as a basis for the national and political advancement of the people of their country.
I think if you investigate the situation, you will find that the so-called open market economy that exists at this moment is only open to some and not to everybody.
Yes. Well, the other day, another Australian politician, Mr. Fisher, said that Burma is heading towards democracy, therefore investment is absolutely justifiable. I mean, what do you say to
well,
like
an investment is not justifiable now. But I am convinced that Burma is heading for democracy because of what the people want and because of what all those who want democracy are doing, and not because of the investors investing or for any other reason.
Japan is another big investor. Playing its part is the Japanese national broadcasting company NHK, which is proud of its impartiality. NHK owns some of the only TV film of the killings in 1988. When we asked to purchase this, we got the following reply. Unfortunately, it is NHK's policy that the footage showing the Burmese army shooting citizens who demonstrated cannot be used by anybody in the world because it's too delicate and might threaten Myanmar's stability. Please erase the material in your library. I appreciate your understanding the situation. With our film smuggled out, we flew to Thailand and crossed the Burmese border into a liberated area held by the Karen, one of Burma's ethnic peoples who have been fighting for autonomy for more than 40 years. The presence of these undefeated people enjoying a guarded freedom in their own land demonstrates that until there is democracy and perhaps a federation of all of Burma's peoples, there will never be peace. When I asked people in Rangoon if 1988 could happen again, if there could be another uprising, I was told this. Imagine a zebra crossing. The traffic never seems to stop for the pedestrians. One or two dart across. The majority wait impatiently at the curb. Then they surge across until the traffic has lost all its power. We, the Burmese people, are back at the curb now, waiting impatiently.
In many ways, Burma is typical of poor countries where foreign investment and tourism have become the triggers for so-called development and economic growth. What this usually means is that those at the top get rich while the majority end up in sweatshops, and that autocrats and dictators gain a false respectability by embracing the so-called free market. In Asia, the result of this is a vast expanding pool of cheap labour from China to Indonesia, and now with the prospect of Burma undercutting them all. This is another side of the Asian economic miracle that you seldom read about on the business pages. Backed by the power of foreign capital and the power of tourism, it gives a gloss to essentially brutal policies. In other words, it normalizes the unspeakable. This was how the apartheid regime in South Africa lasted for as long as it did. Sanctions, not profits, helped to bring it down. At the height of their epic struggle in 1988, the people of Burma produced a genuine popular democracy, then legalized it with an overwhelming vote. For this act of principle and courage, they paid a terrible price. They deserve more than our complicity and silence.
In Washington, the relationship with Saddam Hussein was often cynically called the love affair. In the words of a US Senate investigation, Presidents Reagan and Bush secretly and illegally